I'm Gary Toushek. I want to talk about a powerful new book that I've co-authored with Paul Priori, Abused by the New York Yankees. I've been a freelance writer, a journalist, an editor, and an author for more than 45 years. I choose my assignments and projects carefully, and I did a lot of research for this book to make sure everything is accurate and accountable. Paul and I began work on it in 2007, and it's a major accomplishment in a number of ways. The book begins with Paul as a kid going to Yankee Stadium with his father Nick, who worked there as the Yankees team clubhouse manager during the George Steinbrenner era. Paul ran errands for his dad and helped out around the clubhouse, and eventually Paul became an employee. But even if you know nothing about baseball, you'll still enjoy this book because you don't have to be a sports fan to understand it. It's not about the game of baseball, it's about the people. The players, the employees, the managers, and the owners, and Paul's involvement with all of them. If you do like baseball, whether you like the Yankees or hate them, you'll appreciate this book for all the insights and behind-the-scenes action that you've never heard about. In that sense, it's a tell-all book. It's controversial. It tells a lot of secrets, not just for the sake of spilling secrets, but because most of them are about immoral or illegal activities. Yes, the world-famous New York Yankees committed unethical and criminal acts. Does that surprise anyone? It shouldn't. They were following the example of their fearless leader, twice convicted felon George Steinbrenner. He set the pace. Reporters covering the Yankees at the time had to report what Steinbrenner wanted them to. They couldn't report what was really going on behind the scenes, or they'd risk being banned by Steinbrenner and losing their access to the team. It happened more than a few times. This is also a book about abuse, a serious issue. People who have experienced the horrible, degrading feeling of being injured, violated, or defiled by a bully or attacker will be able to relate. In 1996, Paul was working in the Yankees clubhouse, looking after the players, feeding them, cleaning up after them, washing their uniforms, and so on, when they accidentally found out he's gay. Up to then, he'd always kept it private, and some of them started to verbally abuse him with gay-bashing insults. Then one day he was physically abused by a homophobic, pill-popping macho moron named Bob Wickman. Then a few weeks later, Wickman sexually assaulted Paul when he threatened to sodomize him with a baseball bat, while two other homophobic macho morons forcibly held him down. Their names are Jeff Nelson and Mariano Rivera. Yes, that Mariano Rivera. Surprised? Well, it's true. Then the same three sexual assaulters tried to sodomize a 15-year-old bat boy. When Paul called 911 and tried to report those sexual assaults, he was told that since he was at Yankee Stadium, he should report the incidents to the NYPD cops on duty there. So he tried to, but the cops refused to take notes and report it. Why? Because they worked at Yankee Stadium and loved their cushy job assignment there, didn't want to jeopardize that. But Paul knows their names. Since the police wouldn't do anything, Paul complained verbally to several managers, but his verbal complaints were ignored. So he wrote a letter of complaint to the same managers, but he was still ignored. The three sexual assaulters weren't punished. They weren't even yelled at. And when Paul wrote a letter of complaint to George Steinbrenner, the homophobic bigot told his managers to get rid of Paul because he didn't want any homos in his organization. But they couldn't fire Paul for being gay. That would be illegal and would raise too much noise in the media. And they had no legitimate reason to fire him since he was a diligent hard worker, and his father and colleagues could testify to that. But they still had to get rid of Paul because Steinbrenner had ordered it. So a group of management geniuses cooked up a scam that would accuse Paul of selling $2 million worth of Yankee uniforms to a collector in Vegas. What a joke. They knew it was a lie. There was no evidence because they made it up. But they thought they'd get away with it because they were the world-famous Yankees, and no one questioned the Yankees, not with George Steinbrenner in charge. So one day Paul was summoned to his dismissal meeting by these management geniuses. You want names? Lon Trost, the in-house lawyer who's still there today with a fancy title. Bob Watson was team general manager. Brian Cashman was assistant GM. And Tom May seemed to be Cashman's assistant at the time. Steinbrenner wasn't even there. The truth is, he didn't have the balls to fire anyone himself. Ironic, isn't it? The intimidating bully had no guts to fire people himself. He always got someone else to do it. I wonder if his father Henry knew about that. Anyway, they accused Paul of the grand theft of $2 million worth of Yankee uniforms, but they never had him charged with any crime, because they knew he was innocent. But unknown to them, Paul recorded that dismissal on audio tape, so he has evidence of their moral abuse. Actually, that dismissal meeting got even stranger and almost comical. You can read about it in the book. Later, Paul told a few reporters that he'd been falsely accused of theft and dismissed from his job. And when a reporter asked the Yankees to comment, they suddenly changed their story to Paul being fired for performance and conduct, which was defamatory considering his reputation for hard work. Paul sued the players who'd sexually assaulted him, as well as the organization, because he wanted his day in court to expose the Yankees for their crimes. But Steinbrenner was determined not to let that happen, because negative media attention from Paul's lawsuit would damage the Yankees' image, which would ultimately affect his organization's bottom line, all that revenue from selling game tickets and merchandise to fans. It's important to note that Paul was not countersued, because the Yankees knew Paul was right and they were wrong. Plus, Paul has a lot of audio tapes that he secretly made when he worked there. Plus, he has other evidence. And the Yankees' lawyers knew all that. And that's why Steinbrenner was terrified of Paul's case going into a courtroom, and he did everything he possibly could to dig up dirt on Paul. But there wasn't any to find. Paul was and is always law-abiding. So in desperation, Steinbrenner used his powerful connections and influences to pay off whoever he had to get the case thrown out. And there's a lot more to the story. Let's look at gambling. A big fuss has been made about Pete Rose betting on baseball because it's not allowed for participants in the Major League. But you know what? The Yankees bet on baseball with a bookie. They even bet on themselves to deliberately lose. Paul has indisputable proof of that, evidence. But did the Yankees get admonished for betting on baseball by Major League Baseball? Hell no! Commissioner Bud Selig knew all about it because Paul wrote him a letter, and Selig did nothing. So Paul wrote him another letter. Selig still did nothing. Did Selig receive Paul's letters? Yes, because someone at Selig's office phoned Paul to thank him. The new commissioner, Rob Manfred, knows about it too. We recently wrote him a letter and also sent him a backup email. And what has he done about it? Nothing that we know about. He never bothered to reply. So Pete Rose is shamed by the media and all of baseball for betting on games, and he gets kicked out of the Major League and treated like a pariah. The Yankees bet on baseball, but nobody wants to know. I'd call that Major League hypocrisy, wouldn't you? Hell, the Yankees might still be betting on baseball today, since some of the same people involved in it 20 years ago are still there today. Not only did the Yankees bet on baseball games, including their own, they also gambled in the clubhouse almost every night and drank booze along with underage bat boys and NYPD cops on duty at the stadium. They all played poker and blackjack. And during the day, some players, the heavy drinkers, would often send bat boys out to buy liquor for them. And manager Joe Torre and coach Don Zimmer would send those underage bat boys to the off-track betting office to place bets on horse races. By the way, Torre was in his office when Paul and the bat boy were being sexually assaulted by the three macho morons. But Torre was too busy talking to reporters and didn't bother coming out to see what was happening, even with all the yelling going on. And of course, Mr. Torre is now an executive at Major League Baseball's office in Manhattan. I wonder if he's talked about this stuff with Selig or Manfred. I doubt it, because this scandal involves the world-famous Yankees, who can do no wrong in Major League Baseball, apparently. Other secrets in the book. Well, George Steinbrenner was notorious for not paying some of his suppliers until they either begged for their money or sued him. And even then he waited till the last possible minute outside the courtroom and offered them only a portion of what they were owed, reminding them that they were privileged to be doing business with his world-famous Yankees. And Steinbrenner kept two sets of books, one official, the other temporary, and stacks of papers for the temporary one were routinely carted by various office staffers down to the basement of the stadium, where they were dumped into a metal container and incinerated. That's absolutely true. No wonder Steinbrenner got so rich. He was cheating big time. We've written a letter to the U.S. Attorney's Office, telling them these and other facts, and requesting an investigation by the Department of Justice into George Steinbrenner's duplicitous and illegal business practices, which may even be continuing today. Who knows for sure? Other secrets? A lot of macho players had sexual escapades with girls who worked the concession stands at Yankee Stadium, some of who were underage, working part-time for school money. And some of the married players screwed around on their wives, with girls at the stadium and on road trips. Steroids are a familiar story in baseball. Paul saw players shooting up in the toilet stalls, and some popped pills, others did cocaine, and although certain statements from management indicated they knew about the drugs, they let it go, because their attitude was whatever made the players happy and improved their performance on the field was fine, because the focus was on winning any way you could. Forging autographs on baseballs and other memorabilia was quite common, because a lot of the players couldn't be bothered signing, and management didn't want to bother the players. So bat boys and other employees were taught how to forge players' autographs. And some were pretty good at it. Sometimes it was hard to tell the difference. If I was a Yankee fan and had a player's autograph but didn't see him sign it myself, I'd be concerned if it's legit. We also take you into the boardroom, where the Yankees board of directors met. Paul was a runner. He got genuine autographs for those who requested the real thing, because he was known as the only person who refused to forge autographs, because it was wrong. And he would bother the players for their real autographs, and he got them, although they always gave him a hard time. And when he wasn't getting autographs for the Steinbrenner family and the partners, Paul would stand by in that huge boardroom and quietly observe those meetings. His observations are very enlightening. And my goodness gracious, the drinking that went on at those meetings, and on, and on. What else? There are a lot more secrets in the book, and a few surprises that'll catch you off guard. Early on, Paul and I realized that some people would find this stuff hard to believe, even with all his proof and evidence, including audio tapes. So he agreed to submit to a lie detector test, or as we call it, his truth test. You'll find it at the end of the book. 26 comprehensive multi-part questions and answers. The test is done by a certified operator using a computer voice stress analyzer, which uses sophisticated software programming. It's much more reliable than a polygraph. A polygraph is outdated technology, a machine so unreliable that it's not allowed as court evidence in most American states. On his computer voice stress analyzer test, Paul scored 100%. We took our controversial manuscript to two of the biggest publishers in the world. We can't say which ones because they signed our confidentiality agreement. The first one was very interested, but ultimately passed on it because they said it was too controversial. The second one was disappointed that we included the dark side of the Yankees. Look, we acknowledge that a lot of honorable Yankee players throughout the years have achieved milestones in baseball, and that's great. They should be celebrated for those. And some of them are in this book. We applaud a number of players who are a credit to the team and to baseball. Anyway, we gave our manuscript to a very reputable defamation lawyer to vet it for us. And then we made adjustments. And then we proudly published it ourselves. But it's still a very controversial book, because everything we say in it is true. And some of the people who are in it won't like that, because they'll be embarrassed or disappointed because of their questionable behavior some 20-odd years ago. Our advice to them? Just admit that what you did was wrong. As for the three sexual assaulters, Bob Wickman, Jeff Nelson, and Mariano Rivera, you know you are guilty and will be judged accordingly. And don't bother denying that it happened or claiming you can't recall, because we have proof. And since you weren't punished, it's our duty to inform the public in case any of you were planning to abuse or assault someone else someday. To the management geniuses who came up with that fictitious $2 million uniform scam for Vegas, you lose, because we have proof that you made it up. By the way, I mentioned Brian Cashman as one of those geniuses. Interesting to see that he married a wonderful woman, they had 2 children, lived in a nice home, but the guy just wasn't satisfied with that. He had to go and cheat with 2 mistresses that the media has reported on. And now he's divorced. But apparently that's fine with the Yankees organization. They renewed his contract as general manager, so obviously their morality is all about making money. As long as the team's competitive, that's all that matters to them. To critics who would suggest that most of the stuff happened some 20-odd years ago, so what's the big deal? I'll draw an analogy to the Bill Cosby situation. For a long time, Cosby was silent to the allegations of abuse, rape, sexual assault, and so on, even though slowly and gradually a lot of women have found the courage to come forward in the public spotlight and accuse this perpetrator of crimes. Although he's very wealthy and can afford the most expensive lawyers to fight the allegations, ever since details of his deposition and admitting guilt have been released, Bill Cosby is finished. He deserves to be incarcerated. His entire career has now been devastated, which seems appropriate considering that many of his accusers used that word or similar words to describe their condition after what he did to them. So it's never too late to seek justice and punish the guilty, if only in the public eye. To critics who would suggest that Paul is revealing all these secrets for revenge against the Yankees for the way they abused him, I'll tell you that he has more integrity than that. What you have to realize about Paul is that he's telling all these things because it's the right thing to do. When he sees wrongdoing, he has to step up and say or do something, or report it. That's who he is. We have 2 quotes in the front of our book. The first one is that the truth will set you free. The second is from Mark Twain. Always do right. This will gratify some people and astonish the rest. It infers that people who always do the right thing will find supporters, but the rest of the crowd, the majority, will be astonished that the truth has been revealed for all to see. The question remains, what happens then? At Yankee Stadium, there was an unwritten code of silence that everyone who worked there seemed to adhere to because they were afraid of Steinbrenner. He was a ruthless bully who ruled with fear and intimidation, and it meant that regardless of what his employees saw happen, no matter how bad or illegal or immoral, they were reluctant to say anything about it, so they just accepted it. Or they went along with it because that's the kind of people they were. Maybe they figured if the owner was doing bad things, it was okay for everyone else too. Today, we know that the Yankees organization is well aware of this book. It's been out long enough for them to have read it, and they realize there's a lot of damaging evidence against them. In fact, they're refusing to talk to reporters who have asked them about this book because they're hoping that Paul and I and this book will just go away. But we won't go away. Are we afraid of being sued by them or any of the players we talk about? Not at all. Because they wouldn't dare sue us. They'd lose. It would be too embarrassing for them in the public eye. For one thing, the evidence I keep mentioning. For another, we'd demand that every one of them submit to the same lie detector test that Paul took. And even if they answered every question with "don't remember" or "can't recall," the stress they exhibit would be registered. In my career, I've spent some time doing investigative journalism, and I know what it's like to sink your teeth into a great story. This is a great story, and I invite investigative reporters and journalists to ask all the silent offenders about these facts. Wickman, Nelson, Rivera, Cashman, and the Yankees organization. I mean, how often does an opportunity like this come along? On Paul's behalf, I call on the support of the gay community, who so far have been pretty quiet about this book. Now that I've explained a few things, hopefully you can get on board and help spread the word. Our website is abusedbytheyankees.com. You can send me an email from there. And if you look at our website photo gallery, you'll see Paul's main abusers, the 3 sexual assaulters plus Cashman and Steinbrenner. Abusedbytheyankees.com. It's the only place you can get this important, complicated book. I hope you read it.